formula for driving the world insane. Adam Smith observed that in every society, two moral systems coexist, one, rigidly conservative, for the poor, another, flexible and permissive, for the rich and elegant. What happened was that the advent of modern democracy significantly altered the interaction between these two codes. First, it elevated the moralism of the poor to the ruling class. In 19th-century America, for the first time in history, a caste of governors emerged who admitted to being judged by the same rules that applied to the rest of the population. In the following century, the proportions reversed. Permissiveness not only reinstated itself among the upper class, but it also trickled down and contaminated the common people. It is true that it didn't happen completely. Half of the American nation still understands and judges itself according to the precepts of the Bible. However, the effects of the sexual revolution were profound, spreading permissiveness and debauchery far beyond the realm of sexuality. The consequences of this transformation extend far beyond the moral domain, as Michael Jones demonstrated in a memorable series of studies. It is precisely there that one should seek the cause of the success of totalitarian ideologies in the 20th century. The poet Stephen Spender, after breaking with the Communist Party, had already admitted that what led Western intellectuals to have a passion for ideologies that were contrary to their own freedom was the feeling of guilt and the desire to rid themselves of it at a low price. The origin of this guilt lies in the fact that large sections of the middle class began to enjoy practically unlimited leisure and pleasures without having to bear the political, military, and religious responsibilities with which the old aristocracy paid the moral price for their sexual and alcoholic excesses. In a time when France was the most Christian country in Europe, Louis XIV had more than 20 mistresses, but his work routine was heavier than that of any multinational executive, not to mention the fact, brilliantly emphasized by René Girard, that the royal function entailed the obligation to serve as a scapegoat for national ills. When Louis XVI's head rolled to pay off his father's and grandfather's debts, it was not a revolutionary innovation, but simply the fulfillment of an implicit agreement at the heart of the monarchical system. Even in the Middle Ages, the burden of territorial defense fell entirely on the aristocratic class. No one could compel a peasant or merchant to go to war, but a nobleman who shirked his military duties would be instantly executed by his peers. Noblesse oblige, the aristocratic class was freed from part of the Christian moral rigor in proportion to the extent they paid for their freedom with the constant offering of their own lives in sacrifice for the greater good. The democratization of permissiveness spreads the rights of the aristocracy among a multitude of newcomers who suddenly find themselves liberated from religious pressure without having to assume any additional burdens, no matter how minimal, capable of restoring the balance between rights and duties. On the contrary, along with freedom comes access to countless goods and a standard of living that even surpasses that of the old aristocracy, all obtained effortlessly. Ortega y Gasset noted in his 1928 classic, The Revolt of the Masses, that the typical representative of the modern middle class, the mass man, was actually a pampered little daddy's boy, a contented senorito who considered himself the rightful heir to all the benefits of modern civilization for which he had not contributed in the slightest, for which he had to pay nothing, and about which he generally remained ignorant regarding the sacrifices that produced them. Throughout previous civilizations, a certain balance between cost and benefit, between rights and duties, between pleasures and sacrifices, was recognized as the central principle of human sanity. The liberation of immense masses of population to the enjoyment of free pleasures and refinements is one of the most threatening psychological situations ever experienced by humanity since the time of caves. For each individual engulfed in this process, the most direct and inescapable effect of the experience is a deep and overwhelming sense of guilt, though less conscious it is. But how could it be conscious when, to the same extent that the doors of pleasure open, those of religious consciousness close? The contented senorito is corroded by a profound self-hatred, but he is forbidden, by the prevailing culture, from perceiving the true nature of his guilt, and even more so from alleviating it through religious confession and the fulfillment of penitential duties. The poorly conscious guilt, as psychoanalysis has repeatedly shown, always ends up externalizing itself as persecutory and accusatory fantasies projected onto others, onto the world, onto the system. The moderately educated man of our time casts his guilt onto the system, pretending to himself that he is revolted by what it denies to the poor when, in reality, he hates it for what this system gives him without demanding anything in return. Not that the system is without guilt, but the same general prosperity that spreads the benefits of civilization among growing masses who could never dream of it in previous centuries shows that these guilt feelings are not economic in nature, but cultural. Capitalism does not create misery but wealth, but along with it, it spreads secularism and permissiveness, disrupting the balance between pleasure and sacrifice, a basic need of the human psyche. Hence the apparent paradox that hatred of the system spreads mainly, or exclusively, among the classes that benefit the most materially from it. The socialist temptation appears there as the easiest channel through which the guilt of the pampered little daddy's boy is precisely cast onto the sources of his well-being and freedom. After nearly 8 decades, Western humanity has learned nothing from the experience and is ready to repeat it. Hypnotized by the logic of desire, which sees no cure for its ills other than the pursuit of more satisfaction and more freedom, how could it discover that its problem is not a lack of goods or pleasures but a lack of duties and sacrifices that restore the meaning of life and the integrity of the soul? Needless to say, adherence to the revolutionary and socialist ersatz, being fundamentally a neurotic farce, does not alleviate guilt in any way but represses it even deeper into the unconscious, where it becomes all the more explosive and lethal when covered by a discourse of ideological self-sanctification. Hatred of the system grows in the same measure as the self-flattering illusion of purity of intentions induces each person to become increasingly complicit in the corruption and crimes of the Revolutionary Party. The capitalists, the representatives of the system, passively accept being the object of hatred and even rejoice in it, vainly hoping to purge their own guilt in this way. However, since their guilt does not lie where the revolutionary discourse points, each new concession to leftist clamor only makes them even more guilty and vulnerable. Anticipating the analyses of Jones and Himmelfarb, Igor Caruso located the origin of neuroses not in the repression of sexual desire, but in the rejection of the appeals of moral conscience. The abandonment of guilt consciousness can only result in the proliferation of unconscious guilt. And unconscious guilt requires new and new scapegoats, whose sacrifice only makes them even more distressing and intolerable. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This text was taken from the article, The Formula for Drive the World Insane, by Olavo de Carvalho, written in 2007.